There was once a prince who wanted a wife, but none of the young women that he met felt right to him. He looked all over the land and still he couldn't find the right match. One night there was a raging storm and there was a knock at the door, and the prince answered the door, and outside stood a young woman, drenched, completely bedraggled. She said, "I'm lost. Please, can I have shelter from the storm? I'm completely wet and the storm is raging. And I am a princess, but I'm just lost in this forest. But please, let me come in and have shelter from the storm." And the prince looked at her and checked with the old king and the old queen, his parents who he lived with. And they came to the door and heard the story, the plight of this young woman who said she was a lost princess needing shelter from the storm. And the king and the queen thought, of course, let's let her in. And so they invited the young woman in for the night, and they showed her to a beautiful guest chamber, a guest room, where there was a bed that the queen had made up as a little challenge for her guests, a test of a kind. The bed had 20 mattresses layered on top of each other, and underneath the bed, the queen had placed a little pea, tiny pea, underneath the 20 mattresses on this huge 4-posted bed. And on the bed there were many different eiderdowns and blankets. And as the young woman looked in this room, she was astonished by this extraordinary bed. And they all said, "Good night, sleep well, see you in the morning for breakfast." And the young woman said, "Thank you so much for giving me this beautiful bedroom and shelter from the raging storm." You might recognize this as The Princess and the Pea. So in the morning, the old king, the old queen, and their son, the prince, sat expectantly waiting to see how the princess, so called, the young woman, the guest, had slept that night. And they sat round the breakfast table in the palace waiting, and then she emerged. And she sat down politely, saying thank you for everything. And the queen said, "So tell me, my dear, how did you sleep last night?" And the princess said, "Well, despite the fact that this was the most amazing bed I have ever seen, I couldn't sleep a wink. I've been up all night. There was just something that kept me awake." And she had shadows around her eyes and looked exhausted and drained. And she said, "And I've got bruises all over my body. I just think that something about the bed just didn't suit me." And to her surprise, all of their 3 faces, the king, the queen, and the prince, lit up. For this was the test of whether or not she was a real, authentic princess. And they explained to her that she'd passed the test, that underneath the 20 thick mattresses, the queen had placed a tiny pea. And that everyone else that had slept in that bed, unwittingly going through this test, they had failed the test and had slept a good deep sleep, a good night's sleep, and not had any inkling about this little pea underneath the mattresses. But this woman, she had had a night of insomnia. And this was the test and the sign that she was the true princess. Her bruises, her shadows under her eyes, her insomniac night were a sign for this family that she was true royal blood. And then apparently they lived happily ever after because she was then married to the prince because she was the perfect match, because she had felt the pee underneath all those layers of mattresses. So this was a fairy tale that really had a huge impression on me. Maybe all those insomniacs out there will also relate to the fact that this is a story that celebrates not being able to sleep. One thing, when I talk to other people about this fairy tale, the visual image that everyone remembers is the amazing bed, the big 4-poster bed with 20 mattresses, and that was the image that really felt magical to me. This incredible, unusual, unique bed that has not appeared anywhere else, I don't think, apart from in this tale. And this tiny pea. And to be honest, it wasn't the pea that really kind of caught my attention that much. It was the bed and the many layers. So I just want to think a little bit about what happens to this young woman. Again, it's a tale of not so much of an intruder. She's not an intruder, but it's the trope of the lost girl outside in the forest who sees a house. In Goldilocks, she breaks in. In Hansel and Gretel, they're lured in from the forest by the sweets. And this is asking for hospitality, asking for help. And I think it's really interesting that it starts with the princess's, the woman's direct plea for help. She doesn't try and break in, or she doesn't have to be seduced or lured anywhere. She knocks on the door and says, "Can you help me, please? I'm lost. I'm drenched. I have nothing. Can you give me shelter?" It's a direct plea for help, of which the answer is yes. So it starts off with a kind of hospitality, but not a straightforward one. Into this bedchamber, she goes and sees this extraordinary bed, and then has a night of insomnia. Not only that, but she wakes up with bruises all over her body. Now, this really had a big impression on me too. Something happened to her in the night, which caused her to be covered in bruises and to not sleep. Sounds like a traumatic night. And then we discover that it's just this tiny, tiny pea that causes injury to her, injury on her skin, and gives her this hypervigilance that doesn't allow her to rest or sleep, despite the incredible, voluptuous 20 mattresses. So this is meant to be about sensitivity. This is a sensitive woman. And in this fairy tale, that's what is equated with being a so-called princess, sensitivity. And this sensitivity is expressed through two things: insomnia and having an easily bruisable skin, a thin skin, a skin that can feel the tiniest pea at the bottom of 20 layers of mattress. The way it's like the layers are, it's such a brilliant visual image of having 20 mattresses, because it's like layers and layers and layers and layers of, I mean, you can see it as the unconscious, whatever, I don't know, but it has a depth, doesn't it? The idea that you could feel something right at the bottom, or that something tiny right at the bottom the mattresses could produce such symptoms like bruises and insomnia. The little pea could induce a kind of trauma in the person. Or in this myth, it's about sensitivity, but it's like she has no skin. She has a thin skin, because otherwise, why would the motif of the bruise be used? If you bruise easily, that it's a metaphor, isn't it, for being easily hurt? But it's also about something to do with the skin. Because sensitivity, it's as if sensitivity is about, in this formulation, it's about not having a skin. So the notion of a thick-skinned person would be that they could just sleep anywhere, however many peas that were under the mattresses. Their skin's so thick, they can just sleep anywhere. But she bruises easily from the tiniest thing. What's interesting about this too is that the test that the old king and the old queen make on this young woman is a good test, really, in some ways, because one thing you can't do is fake insomnia or fake being, well, actually you could fake being bruised, because you could sort of hit yourself to make yourself being bruised, but I mean, you can't fake insomnia. And what's brilliant about that is that you think about other myths like Sleeping Beauty, or even in The Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy and her friends are trying to get to Emerald City and they have to pass through the poppy fields, and they're just trying to stay awake more than anything, but actually they are just completely having to surrender and give in to sleep. And the same happens in the ancient myth of Gilgamesh, which I'll come to in a different video. But there's one bit where he's gone on this huge, massive journey to the ends of the universe, through the river of death, to find this one man who knows the secret of eternal life. Because Gilgamesh is passionate about trying to find the secret of eternal life. He's absolutely racked with despair about the fact that he's mortal, and that his friends and loved ones are mortal. And he goes to the ends of the earth to find this man with the secret. And the man says to Gilgamesh, "You're really not ready. You're chasing the wind with this quest. Just try and stay awake for 1 week to show me that you're even remotely ready to know the secret of eternal life." Gilgamesh says, "Of course I can." And he sits there ready to stay awake for a whole week. And within hours after his big journey, he's in deep sleep. And the man says to his wife, "Look at him. He thought he wanted to know the secret of eternal life. He can't even stay awake 1 night. And then let's show him the truth by baking a loaf every day that he is asleep." And they bake 7 loaves. Gilgamesh falls asleep for a whole week. And when he wakes up, they say, you couldn't even stay awake for 1 night, let alone a week. So this is a bit of a similar test, wasn't it? But the other way around. And he sleeps for a week, and he's like, "You're chasing the wind, don't even try, you're not up to it." And Sleeping Beauty is another myth of sleeping where, that's another whole story, but that's this image that sort of, I guess, equates or it's resonant with The Princess and the Pea. You have this other image of a huge bed, amazing, voluptuous bed in a palace, with Sleeping Beauty asleep for 100 years in a deep sleep. And then this Princess and the Pea, a night of insomnia covered in bruises. And this makes her the true princess. I think it's interesting that sensitivity in this myth is represented through insomnia and bruises. Because the other thing is that the princess who wants to be perfect is so worried about looking tired and having shadows under her eyes, or bruises on her skin, blemishes, marks, stains. But now these become a mark of her true goodness, her compassion, her empathy, her goodness, her kindness, her authenticity. But it's double-edged, isn't it? One wonders, this thin-skinned, sensitive, insomniac young woman who gets chosen as the true princess, who lives happily ever after with this prince. You never know which way it's going to turn, because we all know that the other way in which this sensitive princess model can be used is against her oh, you're such a princess, you can't even go to sleep like on this beautiful bed. Like you get like bothered by the tiniest thing, a little pea, and it bothers you. Is this prince going to have to be going around all the beds they sleep in to check out for peas? And you bruise so easily, toughen up. One thinks of the notion of hysteria, of the young women in the literature of hysteria who are so sensitive to everything that they can't even really live in the world without being in pain, because bruising is a sign of pain and insomnia is a sign of anxiety. So there's a model of pain and anxiety equated with the sensitive, authentic princess. But what's the cost of that? Because we don't know which way that's going to go. It can be used against her. She had no idea this was going to be her prize, to show that she got the prize whether she wanted it or not. That's never even asked about marrying the prince. But the pea and the bruises and the insomnia, it can really go either way. Like this notion of the true princess can also go either way. Anyway, let's hope she gets a good night's sleep at some point.